May 28, 1940. Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring reviewed the latest intelligence dossier with open disdain. The report summarized President Franklin D. Roosevelt's recent appeal to Congress, which called for an unprecedented surge in American aircraft output, and ambitious goal of producing 50,000 planes annually. "They think propaganda alone can intimidate us," Göring remarked to his aides. "They have no idea what actual war production demands. Let them try transforming their automobile plants into aircraft factories. They will quickly discover that airplanes are not built like cars on a simple assembly line." Yet Göring underestimated the reality unfolding in Detroit. There, a Danish-born industrialist, William Knudsen, was already putting American capabilities to the test. Once the head of General Motors, Knudsen had accepted Roosevelt's invitation to lead national production for a symbolic salary of $1 per year. Using the mass production techniques honed in the automotive industry, he began orchestrating what would become the largest industrial mobilization in history. Within 4 years, the United States would not only reach but nearly double the initially proposed 50,000 aircraft per year, all while equipping 2 fully separate theaters of war on opposite sides of the globe. Roosevelt had issued his challenge on May 16, 1940, as German armored divisions raced across France. Addressing Congress, he stated that he wanted the nation prepared to manufacture at least 50,000 military planes annually. At the time, the statement seemed nearly fantastical. In 1939, U.S. military aircraft production totaled just 3,611 units. The Army Air Corps possessed 1,700 combat planes, many of which were obsolete. Yet Roosevelt insisted on a 14-fold expansion, a target that would have seemed impossible to most observers. William Knudsen became the key figure behind this unprecedented industrial effort. When presidential advisor Bernard Baruch was asked who could accomplish such a formidable task, he answered with unwavering confidence: first, Knudsen; second, Knudsen; third, Knudsen. Knudsen had left behind a lucrative $300,000 a year career to dedicate himself entirely to his adopted country, applying the principles of automotive mass production to the manufacture of military aircraft. Implementation began immediately. By December 1941, U.S. factories were turning out 2,000 military planes per month, a 20-fold increase compared to just 2 years earlier. The Ford Motor Company announced plans for an enormous bomber facility in Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded its Seattle operations, and Douglas Aircraft recruited thousands of new employees. The industrial machinery of the arsenal of democracy was awakening, gradually silencing the skepticism of many foreign observers. Nazi leaders' dismissal of American capabilities was rooted not only in arrogance but also in deep-seated racial prejudice. Friedrich von Bottcher, a German military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, consistently transmitted accurate assessments of U.S. industrial mobilization. In December 1940, he warned Berlin that U.S. war production was on a trajectory beyond all expectations. Yet German authorities labeled his reports as exaggeration. When Bottcher met with Hitler in February 1939 to discuss the U.S. potential, the Führer ignored factual intelligence, fixating instead on racial theories. He characterized Americans as racially degenerate, half Jewish, half African, and dismissed any notion that the United States could sustain a prolonged conflict. This ideological rigidity blinded the regime to the actual strategic realities. The prejudice extended throughout the German military bureaucracy. Luftwaffe intelligence scoffed at reports of women working in U.S. aircraft plants, interpreting it as a sign of desperation rather than efficiency. Similarly, when analysts learned that some factories operated around the clock with 3 shifts, they assumed the figures were inflated.
German leadership could not comprehend that a democratic nation, mobilized efficiently, might surpass the output of a totalitarian state. The Nazi ideology could not reconcile with the realities of American industrial power. Ford's Willow Run facility epitomized this capacity for large-scale ambition. Groundbreaking on April 18, 1941, the plant was constructed on former farmland and would eventually become the largest single-roof factory in the world, covering 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line stretching an entire mile. Charles Sorensen, Ford's head of production, ambitiously pledged that the factory would eventually turn out one B-24 Liberator bomber every hour, a stark contrast to other plants, which were struggling to complete one bomber per day.
The early stages of production, however, were disastrous. The first B-24, finished in September 1942, was practically unusable and required complete reconstruction. Quality control was a major issue, with nearly half of the parts failing inspection. By February 1943, Willow Run's output amounted to a mere 56 bombers per month, far below the projected hundreds, prompting critics to mockingly dub the facility Willow Run. Despite these setbacks, Ford's engineers persisted, deconstructing the bomber's 488,193 components into smaller, manageable subassemblies. Innovations quickly followed. Workers introduced hydraulic riveting equipment, pre-assembled wiring harnesses, and continuously moving assembly lines. They were forced to integrate 578 design alterations in 1943 alone, while keeping production ongoing. By September of that year, monthly output had increased to 148 bombers, and by December, it reached 365. The decisive breakthrough came in April 1944, when Willow Run achieved a record 428 bombers in a single month, equivalent to one aircraft every 63 minutes around the clock. This one plant alone had surpassed the total production capacity of the entire German aviation industry. German pilots began to grasp the scale of American industrial superiority during the Tunisia campaign. In December 1942, Major Johannes Steinhoff, commander of JG-77, noted that American aviators were no longer inexperienced and the increasing numbers were alarming. This recognition spread throughout 1943. On January 27, 1943, American bombers conducted their first raid directly on German territory, targeting Wilhelmshaven with 64 aircraft. By October, during the Black Thursday engagement over Schweinfurt, the United States could afford to lose 60 B-17s and replace them within just 2 weeks, making the math of attrition painfully clear to the Luftwaffe. During the massive bombing offensive known as Big Week, from February 20th to 25th, 1944, the 8th and 15th Air Forces launched 3,500 sorties against German aircraft manufacturing centers. German losses included 262 to 355 fighters, but more devastating was the attrition of approximately 100 veteran pilots who could not be replaced. General Adolf Galland reported to Hermann Göring that Germany was losing 1,200 fighters each month while producing only 1,000, whereas American factories were producing 2,500 while losing just 400. Major Heinz Baer, a German ace credited with 220 victories, recalled a January 1944 mission over Brunswick. The bomber formations extended from horizon to horizon, comprising at least 700 D-17s and B-24s. His squadron of 8 fighters faced insurmountable odds. By 1944, American aircraft production had reached unprecedented levels. Factories collectively manufactured 96,278 aircraft that year alone, including 16,048 four-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 multi-engine aircraft. This single year exceeded Germany's total aircraft production for the entire war, which was approximately 94,677 planes. The technological gap widened further. Each American bomber was outfitted with multiple .5 caliber machine guns and thousands of rounds of ammunition, while German fighters increasingly flew missions with partial armament. U.S. bombers featured powered gun turrets, advanced bomb sights, and sophisticated navigation equipment, whereas German aircraft often lacked functioning radios. Boeing's Seattle Plant 2 alone was producing 16 B-17s per day by May 1944.
Douglas aircraft had expanded from a modest workforce of 68 in 1936 to 170,000 employees across 9 facilities by the mid-1940s. North American aviation was rolling out 500 P-51 Mustangs every month, and Lockheed produced 1 P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, while implementing over 2,100 combat-driven modifications. Supporting industries scaled in tandem. General Motors manufactured 57,658 aircraft engines under license. Packard produced 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. Alcoa increased aluminum production 6-fold, and Dow Chemicals ramped magnesium output from 6 million pounds per year to 333 million.
The mobilization of American labor profoundly challenged Nazi assumptions. Women, who represented less than 1% of the aircraft workforce in 1941, accounted for 65% by 1943, 310,000 women in total. At Douglas's Long Beach plant, women made up 22,380 of 41,620 employees. Rose Will Monroe, who became the original model for Rosie the Riveter, routinely riveted 3,000 components per shift at Willow Run with an astonishing 99.5% accuracy. The scale, efficiency, and adaptability of American industry ultimately proved decisive, overwhelming German production capabilities and reshaping the course of aerial warfare in World War II. At Douglas Aircraft, employing women inspectors led to a dramatic drop in defect rates, falling from 3.2% to just 0.3%. Similarly, at Ford, tools were redesigned with smaller hands in mind, unintentionally boosting overall productivity. The introduction of lighter pneumatic tools eased physical strain, and reorganized workstations minimized workplace injuries. German intelligence misread the presence of female workers as a sign of desperation. A captured Luftwaffe report dismissed them as a temporary measure, predicting a collapse in manufacturing quality. Contrary to this assessment, precision and attention to detail actually improved. Women excelled in tasks requiring meticulous focus, assembly of wiring, instrumentation, and inspection. Their contribution demonstrated resilience and efficiency rather than weakness. While American factories achieved unprecedented output, Germany clung to flawed assumptions. In February 1944, Hermann Göring authorized the Jaeger program, a massive dispersal of production into 729 underground sites reliant on forced labor. The Mittelwerk complex alone held 60,000 prisoners in brutal conditions, with 20,000 perishing. These subterranean factories were plagued with inefficiency and errors. Prisoners frequently sabotaged parts, and the transport of materials between widely scattered facilities caused further delays. As a result, quality control virtually collapsed. Even at peak capacity, the Mittelwerk network produced fewer engines per month than a single Ford plant in Chicago. Meanwhile, U.S. manufacturing and technological innovation continued to accelerate. Boeing pioneered modular construction techniques for the B-29, coordinating assembly across 4 separate factories with fully interchangeable components. The pressurized B-29, priced at $65,000 per unit, integrated advanced systems that German prototypes could not match. By the beginning of 1945, American output had reached 100 B-29s per month. The effectiveness of this industrial power was starkly visible on June 6, 1944. During the Normandy invasion, Allied forces deployed 11,590 aircraft against just 319 German sorties, achieving a 36-to-1 numerical advantage. This was less a matter of tactical skill than the overwhelming result of industrial superiority. Between January and May 1944, preparatory bombing raids dropped 145,000 tons on German targets, surpassing the total tonnage of all German bombing campaigns against Britain over the course of the entire war. American transport planes enabled the rapid deployment of 3 airborne divisions in a single day, using more aircraft than Germany's entire transport fleet could ever provide. By December 1944, raids often involved 1,200 bombers protected by 900 fighters. P-51 Mustangs, with their extended range and superior performance,
could engage any opponent while being available in sufficient numbers to render losses strategically insignificant. German pilots nicknamed them Indians due to their ability to appear en masse across the battlefield.
As defeat loomed, even the Nazi leadership recognized the scale of their production crisis. In December 1944, Goebbels wrote in his diary that Göring's assurances of Luftwaffe dominance now seemed criminally delusional, acknowledging they faced the world's most formidable industrial power armed only with rhetoric. RML warned his staff before D-Day that the Americans could lose 10 tanks for every one destroyed and still maintain overwhelming superiority, emphasizing that no defensive position could resist such material dominance. Hitler similarly admitted in January 1945 that reports highlighting America's industrial capacity, particularly Berdicke's warnings, were accurate. While Germany produced hundreds of units, the U.S. was producing tens of thousands. Albert Speer later testified that American bombing campaigns had reduced German production by 35% for tanks, 31% for aircraft, and 42% for trucks. He stated unequivocally that the systematic targeting of industrial infrastructure was the principal cause of Germany's collapse in armaments manufacturing. Germany did develop remarkable technological innovations, such as the M262 jet fighter, operational by mid-1944, capable of flying 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter. Hitler and Göring believed this aircraft could restore air superiority despite being heavily outnumbered. However, even the most advanced prototypes could not offset the overwhelming industrial and numerical advantage of American production. Germany managed to produce only 1,430 units of the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, and at no point were more than 200 operational at the same time. These aircraft demanded engine overhauls after merely 10 hours of operation. Critical resources were in short supply, forcing German engineers to rely on lower-quality substitutes that compromised performance. Across the Atlantic, the United States had launched its own jet programs as early as 1942. The Bell P-59 Aerocomet fell short of German designs, but the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, more advanced than any jet fielded by Germany, reached production before the war concluded. Unlike Germany, American industry could pursue multiple technologies simultaneously, a strategic flexibility Germany lacked. This contrast illustrates the decisive role of industrial capacity in the conflict. Germany's technological edge in jet aircraft was rendered largely irrelevant against America's ability to mass-produce thousands of conventional fighters while developing the next generation of warplanes. In total war, advanced technology without sufficient quantity proved strategically ineffectual. Hermann Göring's arrest on May 8, 1945, by the U.S. 36th Infantry Division marked his abrupt encounter with the harsh realities of defeat. Initially, he remained defiant during interrogations at the facility in Augsburg, insisting that German engineering had been superior and that only numerical superiority allowed the Allies to prevail. He was later transferred to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, a facility reserved for high-ranking Nazi officials, where he underwent more rigorous questioning.
In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducted extensive interviews with Göring, documenting his growing acknowledgement of American industrial dominance. Göring admitted, "I was aware of the scale of American industrial potential, but the execution went far beyond what I imagined. That single plant at Willow Run alone produced more aircraft than our entire bomber fleet at its peak. It was beyond comprehension." He was particularly struck by American logistics capabilities. "Your ability to sustain forces across 2 oceans while keeping production at home fully operational was unimaginable. We struggled to supply our troops 500 miles from Germany, yet you managed armies 5,000 miles from your own borders." During his trial at Nuremberg,
prosecutors presented compelling evidence of the United States' production supremacy. Graphs demonstrated that by 1944, American monthly aircraft output exceeded Germany's annual production. Footage of Willow Run's assembly lines was shown alongside lists of German cities devastated by bombers produced at that single factory. On March 14, 1946, Göring testified about the difficulty he had in comprehending the scale of American industrial growth. "I always considered the economic and technological potential of the United States to be exceptionally large, particularly in aviation," he stated. "Yet I could never have envisioned that they could multiply aircraft production 100-fold in just 4 years. The sheer magnitude seemed physically impossible." Prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert observed that Hermann Göring was obsessively preoccupied with industrial statistics. He constantly calculated ratios, often comparing the output of individual American factories to Germany's entire aviation industry. One site, Willow Run, drew his particular ire. He referred to it repeatedly as the cursed facility that had overburdened Germany. When confronted with hard numbers, 812,615 aircraft engines produced by the United States compared to Germany's 241,675, Göring could only stare, speechless. The scale of defeat was mathematically undeniable. The magnitude of American production during the war remains extraordinary. In 1940, the U.S. possessed just 3,611 military aircraft. By 1945, that number had surged to 295,959, including 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 other types of aircraft. These figures represent not only volume, but also a systemic mastery of industrial efficiency and organization that Germany could not match.
At the peak of aircraft production, more than 2 million Americans were employed in the sector. This workforce was unprecedentedly diverse, including women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, teenagers, the elderly, and people with disabilities. Unlike the rigid, coercive systems of the Axis powers, this mobilization relied on voluntary participation, which consistently outperformed forced labor in both output and quality. Workers who entered factories in 1941 with no prior experience in aviation emerged by 1945 as highly skilled professionals, capable not just of assembling planes, but of reshaping industrial processes themselves. Techniques such as statistical quality control, initially developed for bomber production, became standard practice in industries around the globe. Willow Run exemplified this industrial revolution. Innovations in automation created efficiencies that transformed manufacturing worldwide. Engineers who optimized bomber assembly lines later contributed to projects as ambitious as the Saturn V rocket. And women who riveted B-24 bombers became the parents of the generation that first walked on the moon. The wartime production surge thus laid the groundwork for America's mid-century technological and economic ascendancy. Financially, the scale was staggering. Aircraft manufacturing consumed $45 billion in 1940s dollars, roughly $800 billion today. The B-29 program alone exceeded the cost of the Manhattan Project. Rather than crippling the economy, this wartime investment fueled unparalleled prosperity. Unemployment, which had plagued the United States during the Depression, effectively disappeared, and personal incomes doubled between 1940 and 1945. Much of this expansion was financed by the workforce itself. Willow Run employees, for instance, collectively purchased $45 million in war bonds, directly funding the factories in which they worked. Germany's approach, by contrast, was far less effective. By 1944, nearly 40% of its entire industrial capacity was dedicated to aircraft production, yet it produced less than half as much as the U.S. Reliance on forced labor proved disastrous. Sabotage was rampant, product quality declined, and productivity per worker fell after 1943, while American output surged by 300%. The wartime production system in the United States also left a lasting post-war legacy. Facilities initially constructed for aircraft, aluminum plants, chemical factories, machine tool shops were converted to serve civilian needs, fueling the rise of suburbs, plastics, and the global competitiveness of American industry. The organizational sophistication achieved during the war was unparalleled. The War Production Board coordinated 184,000 companies with remarkable efficiency, and IBM punch card machines tracked millions of components across thousands of suppliers. Meanwhile, MIT's radiation laboratory employed 4,000 scientists to develop advanced navigation systems, granting American bombers the ability to operate reliably in all weather conditions. Ultimately, the American war production effort was more than a feat of engineering and logistics. It represented a societal transformation. It harnessed human labor voluntarily, maximized efficiency, and established technological and industrial foundations that would sustain the nation's global leadership long after the guns fell silent. When combat experience revealed the vulnerability of the B-17 to attacks from the front, Boeing responded with remarkable speed, integrating chin turrets into production within a mere 60 days. Similarly, operational demands in the Pacific theater prompted modifications to the B-24 fleet to extend range, yet production never paused. In contrast, German aircraft adjustments often required months or even years to implement. The American approach, rapid, iterative, and responsive, was decisive, matching the importance of sheer production numbers. U.S. aircraft designs continuously evolved in real time, drawing on lessons from battles spanning the globe. Reports from Pacific engagements reached Atlantic manufacturing hubs within days, enabling almost instantaneous implementation of improvements. German planes, by contrast, were produced in isolated underground factories under forced labor and remained largely unchanged despite combat feedback. This dynamic feedback loop between frontline experience and industrial output created unprecedented efficiency. Observations from pilots were transmitted directly to engineers, whose solutions reached assembly lines within days. Likewise, suggestions from workers on the production floor could influence design decisions without bureaucratic delay. This relatively egalitarian circulation of information outperformed the rigid hierarchical systems maintained by the German command. On October 15, 1946, hours before his planned execution, Hermann Göring penned his final letter in which he conceded the crucial role of industrial production in determining the outcome of the war. He acknowledged that the Americans had triumphed not through superior soldiering, but through superior factories. "We were defeated not by better troops, but by better industrial organization," he admitted. The nation that many had underestimated as focused solely on consumer goods had, in fact, overwhelmed the enemy with aluminum, steel, and mass-produced machinery. Göring's final communication to his confidant Gilbert reinforced this realization. "We initiated war against an industrial powerhouse while it slumbered. When it awakened, defeat was inevitable. They did not merely outproduce us, they transformed production itself. Every facet of their system outclassed ours." That same night, Göring took his own life, but his final statements remain a historical testament to the decisive power of industrial capacity. He died aware that a single American factory could, in effect, outproduce the entire Luftwaffe over its operational lifetime. Military historians widely regard the United States' production achievement as a pivotal factor in Allied victory. Without the material superiority it generated, major operations such as D-Day would have been unfeasible, strategic bombing campaigns unsustainable, and victory in the Pacific implausible. Historian Richard Overy, a leading authority on the air war, summarized the phenomenon succinctly. Victory was shaped less by courage or tactical ingenuity than by the sheer weight of materiel. The Allied triumph was, above all, a victory of production capacity. By 1944, American industry alone was generating more military aircraft than all other nations, both Axis and Allied, combined. This was not a marginal advantage, but an order of magnitude dominance that left Germany facing total annihilation rather than mere defeat.
The significance of the production miracle extends beyond military history. It also illustrates the comparative strengths of democracy over dictatorship, freedom over coercion, and voluntary collaboration over enforced labor. The transformation was accomplished not by conscripts or enslaved workers, but by free citizens united by shared purpose and common resolve. Their collective effort demonstrated how a society built on voluntary cooperation could harness human potential far more effectively than systems reliant on compulsion. Hermann Göring's underestimation of the United States' industrial power remains one of the most consequential errors in military history. His disregard for the productive potential of a democratic society contributed directly to Germany's defeat and to the loss of countless lives. Göring failed to appreciate the scale and speed at which the United States could mobilize its economy, effectively sealing the fate of the Third Reich before a single Allied bomber reached German skies. In just a few years, American aircraft production skyrocketed from a modest 3,000 planes annually to over 100,000, proving that free societies, when faced with existential threats, can achieve extraordinary feats. American laborers did not merely reach the ambitious targets set by President Roosevelt, they doubled them. Their output did not simply match Germany's war production, it surpassed it by a factor of 5, all while American forces were engaged in combat across the Pacific theater. The lesson for contemporary policymakers is clear. Underestimating the capabilities of democratic nations because of their peaceful tendencies, or assuming that societies valuing prosperity over conquest are weak, can lead to catastrophic misjudgments. In 1940, the United States seemed ill-prepared for total war. By 1944, it had become an industrial powerhouse capable of producing material at a pace no authoritarian regime could match. The so-called arsenal of democracy demonstrated that assembly lines could influence the outcome of war as decisively as battlefronts. Assembly workers could be as critical as frontline soldiers, and industrial mobilization could shape victory as profoundly as military tactics. Göring learned this reality far too late, and the consequences for Germany were irrevocable.
From his dismissive response to Roosevelt's May 1940 announcement to his eventual execution at Nuremberg in October 1946, Göring's trajectory mirrored the collapse of Nazi Germany. His scorn for American industrial capability became symbolic of the Third Reich's fatal miscalculations. A regime that conflated ideology with actual power, mistook oppression for strength, and believed that racial theories could overcome the quantitative realities of production. By the end of the conflict, Göring had to confront the stark reality. In 1944 alone, American factories produced more aircraft than Germany managed over the entire course of the war. His derision of democracy's manufacturing potential became history's costliest error. Over the span of the war, the United States produced 295,959 military aircraft compared to Germany's 94,677. Yet the true triumph was not in sheer numbers, it was in method and execution. Free workers outproduced those in a system of forced labor. Voluntary collaboration exceeded the results of totalitarian command, and a diverse nation of immigrants and citizens from different backgrounds united to achieve what seemed impossible. At Willow Run alone, B-24 bombers were completed every 63 minutes, a testament not merely to industrial capacity, but to the principle that democratic societies could mobilize human talent and ingenuity on a massive scale. Women who had recently been housewives riveted fuselages, teenagers who left school assembled engines, and workers escaping poverty and discrimination contributed wings. Together, they turned democratic cooperation into a force that overpowered tyranny through sheer production. Göring scoffed at the notion that the United States could build 50,000 planes per year. The Americans responded by constructing twice that amount, reshaping the course of the war and global history in the process. His laughter, once mocking, now reverberates through history as a warning of the perils of underestimating industrial democracy. Ultimately, both Göring and the regime he represented were overwhelmed, buried under nearly 300,000 aircraft that transformed scorn into an unequivocal strategic defeat.